Mom said, "You're just jealous of your sister, she's the successful one and you'll never be like her." I couldn't help but laugh as I replied, "Good, then she can pay your bills." An hour later, the irony of her words hit me like a ton of bricks as the repercussions of our family's twisted expectations began to unfold. I wasn't laughing because it was funny, I was laughing because it was utterly absurd. My mother sat across from me, arms folded and face twisted in irritation, as if I were the one being unreasonable. "You're just jealous of your sister," she said in a tone dripping with condescension. "She's the successful one, you'll never measure up." I leaned back in my chair with a smirk. "Good," I replied casually, relishing the way her eyes narrowed in confusion. "Then she can handle your bills." The silence that followed was almost as satisfying as watching my sister Allison stiffen on the couch. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed on her phone as she pretended not to listen, though I noticed the tension in her shoulders. My mother scoffed. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" she snapped. "Allison is out there doing important things with her life, she's busy, unlike you." I shrugged, unbothered. This wasn't new. Ever since we were kids, Allison, the golden child, had always been the successful one. Valedictorian, Ivy League grad, and now climbing the corporate ladder at some prestigious firm. Meanwhile, I was labeled the disappointment, the black sheep. No matter what I did, it was never enough. My mother never cared about my career, my stability, or that I'd built a life for myself, as long as I wasn't Allison. So I decided to give her exactly what she wanted. Stretching out my words like a brilliant revelation, I said, "Since you're the successful one, why don't you call her right now and ask her to take over?" Clearly, I'm useless. I saw a flicker of hesitation on her face, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. With a huff, she grabbed her phone. "At least I actually care about this family," she muttered. Allison looked up from her phone, clearly annoyed. "Mom, what are you doing?" "I need help with the mortgage this month, honey," my mother said sweetly. "Your brother's decided he's done helping." I watched the scene unfold like a movie I'd seen a dozen times, my mother, so convinced that Allison would swoop in and fix everything, and Allison, smugly assuming she was untouchable. But I knew what was coming, and I couldn't wait to see their reactions. Allison sighed and drummed her nails against the armrest as if she had something better to do. "Mom, I already told you," she started, then paused. Her eyes flickered toward me for a split second before she forced on that familiar confident smile. "Of course I'd love to help, but you know how it is, my expenses are through the roof right now. I just put a down payment on a new condo and work's been a nightmare. I really can't take on more right now." My mother's expression shifted from surprise to disbelief to the kind of desperation she usually reserved for guilt-tripping me into paying up. "Allison," she said softly, almost pleading, "sweetheart, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. The mortgage is coming up." And then I cut in, "Mom," I said no. In that instant, the golden child's true colors emerged. I leaned forward, elbows resting on my knees. "Hold on a minute," I said in feigned confusion. "I thought you were the successful one. Shouldn't this be a breeze for you? What happened to that big corporate paycheck?" Allison shot me a glare, but I wasn't finished. "Or maybe you're not as flush as you've been pretending to be." Her jaw clenched. My mother, caught between shock and panic, tried again, "You must have something saved up, you've always been good with money, Allison." But she snapped back, frustration clear in her voice for the first time. "Do you have any idea how expensive my life is? The condo, the car payments, the credit cards, do you think I have extra cash just lying around?" That was when I saw the cracks in the perfect facade. I sat back, smiling to myself, because that was the thing about Allison, she was a master at pretending, always showing off a glamorous life online to seem untouchable and unstoppable. But I knew the truth, she was drowning in debt, stretching herself thin just to keep up the illusion of success, and now there was no hiding it. My mother looked genuinely stunned, and for a moment, I wondered if she'd ever stop saying the same old lines. Allison interrupted with a tone full of irritation. She stood up abruptly, snatched her purse, and declared, "I don't have time for this, I have a meeting." As she turned toward the door, I wasn't finished yet. "So, just to be clear," I said, raising my voice slightly, "you expect me to keep footing the bill while the one who's winning just walks away without a care?" Allison didn't even look back. "Grow up, Nathan," she muttered, stepping out and slamming the door behind her. Silence. I snapped, turning back to my mother, who looked utterly lost. It was the first time I'd seen her at a loss for words. "Huh," I said, standing and stretching, "looks like you bet on the wrong horse, Mom." Her head jerked up, eyes blazing with anger. "This isn't funny, Nathan." I only grinned, because for the first time in years, I was finally in control. My mother clutched her phone as if she could somehow force Allison to call back, but she wouldn't. We both knew she didn't mean it. Muttering more to herself than to me, she said, "She's just stressed. She'll help once she calms down." I tilted my head. "Maybe, or maybe she's been using you just like you've been using me." Her eyes locked on mine in fury. "Don't you dare, what? Tell the truth?" I shrugged. "You made it clear I wasn't your favorite, which was fine, but you also made it clear I wasn't good enough. And now the good one just left you hanging." She clenched her jaw, her breathing unsteady. I could see the gears turning as the slow realization hit that, for once, she had no one to bail her out. I let that sink in, then smiled. "Well, good luck with that." With that, I walked away, leaving her alone with the weight of her own choices. I barely took 3 steps before my mother's voice pierced the silence. "Nathan, wait." I turned slowly, watching her scramble to her feet, desperation now fully exposed. "You can't just walk away from this, I need your help." There it was, the shift. The same woman who had spent my entire life insisting I wasn't good enough was now begging me to stay. "I thought Allison was handling it," I said, folding my arms. Her mouth opened then closed. She just needs time." I raised an eyebrow. "And meantime?" Silence. Her hands fidgeted nervously, a tic I'd seen countless times when she tried to manipulate me. "You've always been responsible, Nathan. You wouldn't let me lose the house." I let out a low chuckle. "You're right, I am responsible. That's why I planned ahead, made sure I was financially stable while you were too busy idolizing Allison to notice." Her eyes widened. "Wait, what do you mean by plan ahead?" I tilted my head, letting the words settle in. I saw the moment she realized what I was saying. "You have money?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. I didn't answer, I let the silence speak for itself. Then panic set in. "Nathan, please, you have to help me." "I do," I interrupted, feigning contemplation. "I remembered you once telling me I'd never be as successful as Allison, that I'd never amount to anything." She flinched. "Well," I continued with a shrug, "I guess you were wrong about that, huh?" She reached for me, but I stepped back. "No, Nathan, listen, I didn't mean it. I was just upset." I shook my head. "No, Mom, you meant every word." And for the first time in my life, I saw that I was in charge now. My mother's breathing grew shallow, her fingers gripping the edge of the table as if it were her only support. I could see it now, the fear in her eyes, the dawning realization that she had nowhere left to turn. "Nathan, please," she said softly, almost trembling. "You're my son. Family sticks together." I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. "Funny, I don't remember you saying that when I needed you." She flinched, as if struck. "That was different," she insisted. "You were always so difficult, so stubborn, you never listened to what was best for you." I laughed, cutting her off. "You mean I never did what you wanted?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You don't understand." She tried another tactic. "This house, my life, everything is falling apart. I need your help." I tilted my head. And where was that same concern when I was struggling? Where was my safety net? For the first time, she had no answer. She had no power over me, and I could see it frightened her. "I should go," I finally said, grabbing my jacket. "No, wait," she rushed forward, grabbing my arm. "I'll make it up to you, I swear, just help me this one time." I gently pried her fingers off. "Mom," I said steadily, "you made your choice long ago." With that, I turned and walked out the door without looking back. I barely reached my car before my phone started buzzing. I glanced at the screen, "Mom," and let it ring. Seconds later came another call, then a text, "Mom, Nathan, please, just talk to me." "Mom, I didn't mean any of it. You're my son, I love you." I scoffed at the notion of love. Now that she needed me, she suddenly remembered how to love me. The messages kept coming, one after the other, but I didn't read them. I started my car, gripping the wheel as a strange feeling settled over me. I should have felt guilty, she always used guilt and obligation to control me. But instead of guilt, I felt free for the first time. I wasn't the forgotten child scrambling for scraps of approval. I wasn't the backup plan when the favorite failed, I was just me, and that was enough. As I merged onto the road, my phone rang again, this time it was Allison. I smirked. "Let the games begin." I let it ring a few times before answering. "Nathan," Allison's voice was sharp and clipped, no fake sweetness, no smug superiority, just raw frustration. "What did you say to Mom?" I smiled to myself. "Nothing," I replied. "She already knows." "Cut the crap," she snapped. "She's freaking out, saying you walked out and left her with nothing. What the hell is going on?" I feigned surprise. "Wait, you mean she called you for help?" I thought you didn't have any extra money lying around. Silence, then a sharp exhale. That's not the point, Nathan, you know I can't handle this right now. Right. I'm used to the condo, the car, the maxed out credit cards, must be tough, huh? Don't act like you're above it all. She fired back, you think you're some kind of hero now just because you walked away? I chuckled. No, Allison, I think I'm just done. You can't simply be done with family. You were done with me plenty of times, she reminded me. Remember all those years you let Mom tear me down while you stood there smiling? Remember how you were the golden child while I was just the disappointment? That's not fair, she muttered. Fair? What's fair is that you finally get to feel what it's like when no one comes to save you. Her voice dropped low and bitter. So this is payback? No, I said simply, it's just reality catching up. After another pause, she said softly, she's going to lose the house, Nathan. I leaned back in my seat. Yeah, she is. And you don't care? I paused to think. No, I answered honestly. Allison exhaled sharply. I could practically hear her nails tapping on her phone, that nervous tick she always had when things went sideways. Are you really going to let this happen? She muttered. Yep, you're a click. I hung up before she could finish. Leaning back, I finally exhaled deeply. This time, I wasn't the one scrambling. It felt liberating. For the next few days, I ignored every call and text. At first, my mother bombarded me with guilt. Nathan, I raised you, how can you do this to me? Then she tried to bargain, I'll change, I swear we can fix this. Finally came the anger, you're selfish and ungrateful, you'll regret this. But I didn't regret a thing. Allison, on the other hand, went completely silent. No doubt, she was busy crafting a spin so she wouldn't have to face Mom's crisis herself. Then, on the 5th day, the doorbell rang. I knew before opening the door that my mother was there. Standing on my doorstep, she looked worse than ever, her perfect posture was gone, her usually neat hair was a mess, dark circles marred her eyes, and her lips were pressed into a thin, frantic line. You weren't answering my calls, she said. I know, I replied, leaning casually against the door frame. She hesitated, torn between throwing a tantrum and begging. Her pride and desperation battled within her. Nathan, please, I don't know what to do. That was the moment she realized she had no control for the first time. That's not my problem anymore, I said simply. You can't just leave me like this, her voice cracked. I can, and I did. Her expression twisted in frustration. What do you want from me? An apology. Fine. I'm sorry, Nathan. Okay, I'm sorry for everything, she added. I tilted my head, silently saying, for everything? Her jaw clenched. You know what I mean. No, I don't. If you were truly sorry, you wouldn't just be saying it because you need something from me. Her breath hitched for a moment, I thought she might actually cry. Nathan, I'll lose the house, then lose it. She flinched as if struck. Where will I go? She whispered. I shrugged. Maybe Allison will take you in. Oh, wait, that's right, she won't. That was the final blow. She knew I was right. Her whole life, she had chosen Allison over me, betting everything on the wrong child. And now, at her lowest point, she was utterly alone. Please, she whispered one last time. I took a deep breath, then with a small, satisfied smile, I said the words I'd been waiting years to say, you made your choice, Mom. Now you get to live with it. And with that, I closed the door in her face. I expected her to knock again, to yell or demand that I open up, but she didn't. Through the peephole, I watched her stand there for a few seconds, shoulders shaking, hands trembling at her sides. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. I felt nothing, not even a twinge of guilt. I had spent years bending over backward for a woman who never truly loved me, years of watching her worship Allison while I was nothing more than an afterthought. And now, finally, she was facing the consequences of her choices. And it wasn't my problem. I thought that was the end of it, but I should have known better. The next morning, I woke to a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it until something urged me to answer. Nathan, said a tight, controlled, eerily calm voice, this is the last time I'm going to ask, help Mom pay off the bills and fix this mess before it gets any worse. I almost laughed. You don't get it, do you? There's nothing left to fix, it's already over. No, it's not, she snapped. She can still keep the house if we act fast. I can pull some strings at the bank, but she needs money, and since you're apparently doing so well, let me stop you right there, I cut in. She's your problem now, Allison, not mine. Silence fell. Then, for the first time, Allison's voice cracked, I can't take care of her, Nathan. There it was, the golden child, the supposedly perfect one. She wasn't so flawless after all. She was drowning. For so long, she had played the role of the confident, put-together daughter that she convinced herself she was untouchable. But now, the weight of everything was crushing her. Not my problem, I repeated. This time, you don't understand, she snapped. If she loses the house, she'll have nowhere to go. Then maybe she should have been a better mother, I replied coldly. She did her best, she laughed bitterly. Her best was treating me like I was worthless, using me for years and discarding me the moment Allison did something even remotely impressive. You just don't get it, Allison's voice rose. You were never supposed to be the one who made it. It was meant to be me. I was the one with a future, the one who was supposed to take care of her. But I couldn't. The admission hung heavy between us. She couldn't, because she wasn't nearly as successful as she pretended to be, and now, when it mattered most, she had nothing to offer. That sounds like a you problem, I said, and then I hung up. 3 weeks later, the house went into foreclosure. Mom tried everything, crying to relatives, pleading with friends, even calling my childhood pals to see if they'd pity her enough to bail her out. But no one helped, not even Allison. I heard through the grapevine that Mom was forced to move into a tiny apartment in a rough neighborhood. No fancy house, no family admiration, she was completely alone. And Allison? Barely holding it together, her condo was on the verge of being repossessed, and her perfect life was nothing more than smoke and mirrors. Meanwhile, I was more than fine, I thrived. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free. It took a while for the calls to stop. At first, Mom tried to maintain appearances, acting as if this was just a temporary setback. She told everyone she was downsizing, that she sold the house because it was too much work to maintain. But the family knew the truth, and for once, no one believed her lies. Allison went silent too, no more smug phone calls, no more attempts to guilt me. She was too busy drowning in her own problems. And me? I was finally free. I didn't just move on, I thrived. I focused on my own goals, on living the life I had built without needing anyone's approval. I traveled, made new friends, and enjoyed every dollar I earned without worrying it would be drained by people who never truly cared. The best part was that for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to prove myself to anyone. No more competing with Allison. No more begging for scraps of affection from a woman who never saw me as good enough. I was done. Sitting in my new apartment, sipping a drink and savoring the silence, I realized something. I hadn't lost a family, I'd escaped one, and I finally had one of my own. The months passed, and for the first time in my life, I lived on my terms. No more desperate attempts to win my mother's love. No more rivalry with Allison. I was free, and I had no intention of looking back. But freedom had an unexpected side effect. I started thinking about what I really wanted for myself, not just what I wanted to escape. One evening, I was cooking dinner in my apartment when my phone rang. This time, it wasn't an unknown number. It was my cousin, Rachel. We hadn't spoken in a while, so I answered. Hey, Nathan, she said cautiously. I know you don't want to hear about Mom or Allison, but I thought you should know. I sighed, already bracing myself. Know what? She's in the hospital. For a moment, my mind went blank. Who? Mom. Rachel explained that she had collapsed in her apartment, malnourished, exhausted, and likely suffering from severe stress. No one had noticed for days until a neighbor, concerned by the silence, called for help. I felt nothing. No panic, no rush of concern. Just a distant, hollow awareness that the woman who had once controlled every aspect of my life had finally hit rock bottom. Rachel hesitated. I'm not saying you have to do anything. But I figured you should know. I thanked her and hung up. I sat there, staring at my half-cooked meal. Did I owe her anything? No. Did I feel guilty? Not really. But there was something else there, an awareness that this was it. The final chapter. The last crossroads. The next day, I found myself standing at the hospital entrance, telling myself that I was only here for closure. Nothing more. When I stepped into her room, she barely looked like the woman I once knew. She was thinner, her hair unkempt, her eyes tired. She looked up at me, and for a second, I saw something unfamiliar in her expression. Not defiance. Not anger. Not manipulation. Just acceptance. You came, she whispered. I shrugged. Rachel called. A weak chuckle. Of course she did. Silence stretched between us. She didn't beg. She didn't guilt-trip me. She just laid there, staring at the ceiling. I was a terrible mother, wasn't I? She finally said. I didn't answer right away. Then, after a long pause, I replied, yeah. She nodded, as if she had been expecting that. I thought I was doing what was best. I thought, if I pushed you away, you'd work harder. Prove yourself. I swallowed the bitter laughter that threatened to rise. I did. But not for you. I know. She exhaled shakily. I lost you a long time ago, didn't I? This time, I didn't hesitate. Yes. She nodded again. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything from you anymore. And for the first time in my life, I believed her. I didn't stay long. I left before the weight of the moment could settle too deeply. But when I stepped outside, something in me felt lighter. A week later, I got a text from Rachel. Mom had checked herself into a rehabilitation program for financial recovery and emotional support. She was trying, in her own broken way, to start over. As for Allison, she was still struggling. We didn't speak again, but I heard through the family that she had finally dropped the act and was working to fix her own life, without the expectation that someone else would do it for her. And me? I moved on. Truly, this time. Not with resentment, not with anger, but with a quiet, final understanding. I wasn't the abandoned son. I wasn't the overlooked sibling. I was just me. And that was more than enough.